with a bit of skepticism about teaching critical thinking in an English language class. In a sense, I was thinking, you know, English language classes are for teaching English language. Should we be responsible for all these other things that are put on us sometimes? And then the second part of it, I was beginning to wonder was, haven't we been teaching critical thinking already? And whether it's a new kind of way of thinking about things. So my first question is really, what is critical thinking? And should we teach it in an English language class? Feel free to just tap in your answers in the chat box if you want. My feeling about it is, let's see what we've got. Depends on the level. Right, okay, we shall be coming back to this in a moment. Coming to reasonable conclusions, thinking rationally. I think we should, as it's another skill to help them learn in general. Okay, we'll see if I agree along the line, along the way. Let's have a thought first at what is critical thinking. I'll give you a moment just to read that paragraph. So what we have here is basically critical thinking in terms of, I would say generally, what we might call citizenships. So it's a way of thinking about being a better human in a sense, or a better person within our wider society, and perhaps questioning things that go on within our society. If we have a look at this definition, critical thinking is one of the most sought after qualities that employers look for. And so what we see here is a slightly different form of critical thinking, which is essentially how to be a better wage slave, how to be a better employee. I think, you know, we have to bear in mind that what we think about as critical thinking has different perspectives itself. We need to be critical about critical thinking to some degree. Which, you know, what will be the outcomes of these different attitudes towards critical thinking? Okay, this is actually taken from that second choice of critical thinking. This idea of 5 critical thinking skills: analysis, communication, creativity, open-mindedness, problem-solving skills. Okay, just again, just a quick activity for you. Just put these in order of importance. What do you think is the most important critical thinking skill? You know, the less important amongst these things. Again, just tap away in the chat box if you like. Okay, so what we can see already, there are some different points of view amongst this task. Now, what I'd like to say is, second thing here, let's take those ones. Now, think about it. Would your order change depending if you were in an English language class, an English language teacher, if you were part of an engineering firm, or if you were a social worker? So would you have the same order? I mean, this in a way is what Amy's just said here, I noticed. Depends on what exactly is more important, depends on your context. So I think for a lot of people it may be different. I mean, there may be reasons why you feel it's the same. But in a way, what we've got here are two activities which are critical thinking. The first was a ranking exercise. And what I'd like to say is we have been doing this for years. This is not a new thing. And to a large degree, I think we have to understand that critical thinking is there already in our classrooms, and we may be encouraging it. And sometimes it's a question of just, perhaps if you want to highlight that to our students. The second part of it, perhaps in a way, is a step further within critical thinking, which is where you're asking students to take a position. You're asking them to imagine themselves in a different situation, from a different perspective, and thinking about how that would change the way they do things. And again, we can be doing this with nearly all activities, or speaking activities, as we'll see. So in terms of my answer, I would say communication and language is the most important skill within within an English language setting. Now, of course, that is my opinion rather than a fact. But what we'll be looking at as we go through are these two ideas as being central to our processes of addressing critical thinking within a classroom. Sorry. So if we think about it first in terms of language, and here I've drawn out the things in that first definition of critical thinking. So highlighting prejudices and stereotypes, highlighting biases and distortions, questioning social rules and taboos, describing self and vested interests. My idea here is, first, what is the actual language that we need to fulfill these skills, if you like? So it's thinking that we have to, the students need the words to be able to highlight prejudice and stereotypes. They need the words and phrases to highlight biases and distortions. Any suggestions, for example, any language that we might teach the students in order to enable them to do these things? Again, you can pop it in the chat box if you have any thoughts. Few things coming up here. Phrases for expressing opinion. Okay. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult to think of these. I haven't got too many suggestions here. Here is one suggestion here. This is from Innovations Intermediate, one of the books I wrote many years ago. And we identified this pattern, just because it doesn't mean. So if you want to students be able to kind of challenge stereotypes, to challenge or highlight prejudices, learning this kind of phrase will help them to do that. And in fact, it makes a kind of little task in itself. It came out of an exercise, vocabulary exercise, looking at adjectives to describe people. And it was in the context of people saying, oh, he's a typical British person, cold and unfriendly. And then we provided this as a kind of counteraction. That's nonsense. Just because you're British doesn't mean you're unfriendly. I know lots of British people who are the opposite. And so what you're doing is you're kind of addressing stereotypes, but providing the language to challenge it. And it actually makes it for, obviously, as you can see, the students is a little chunk. The students could fill in their own ideas of stereotypes or where they would like to challenge stereotypes, and you can kind of they could fit in their ideas of themselves here. So just because I'm a man, just because I'm British, just because I'm an English teacher, just because I'm a 50-year-old, you can imagine the different endings could come there. Similarly, if we take this idea, this one is from Perspectives Upper Intermediate. And what we see is a look at the statements. We have various statements here about education. Teenagers shouldn't hang out without a responsible adult around. Everyone should wear a school uniform, etc. So in the first instance, this task is exactly as we would have in many course books, or pretty much any course book. And, it is already a critical thinking task. We're asking for their opinions. Where we're, again, getting them to take a step further is by giving them different roles for them to then give answers to those questions. So they answer as themselves, and then we give roles for them to answer as different people and understand why those differences may occur. And then we also providing them with language. And again, this is not unusual, but it's just noticing these phrases as a business person, as a parent, as someone who, writes course books. We are identifying ourselves and our position in terms of the argument we are giving. And these kind of phrases it's not just simply giving opinions, which is obviously an important language, and we would provide them one. It's also giving them this other perspective, this language to give another perspective. And we could just give that and do that with pretty much any speaking task that we ask the students to do. Just ask them to take a slightly different perspective from time to time. Obviously here we've got the agree, disagree, and then again, we've got this pattern, just because it doesn't mean, okay? So we can see that we can use language, we can teach language for the students to enable them to talk. The important other aspect of that is when the students are talking, is for us as teachers to listen and to help them say the language, to say the things that they are trying to say in order for them to say them better. And that will often not mean just focusing on narrow grammar or single words. Excuse me. It's also about it's hearing their whole of what they are trying to say and trying to correct that for it to be better. Here again, we have another example of this. So this comes from, flows up from a video the students watch, which is about a woman who's a photo retoucher. I didn't know it existed as a job, but it's basically these people who work for magazines, and their general job is to make beautiful people look even more beautiful. And what she gives a video about is talking about taking a different role within when they heard the tsunami in Japan. A lot of people lost their family photos, or their family photos were damaged, and she worked with those people to help restore these photos. And it was kind of taking taking a job which had been somewhat vilified and putting it to a more positive use, if you like. So in the same way, we take that idea and try to think about how these people may be good in a crisis or disaster, or how they might be generally good for society. And again, what we're doing is we give them some ideas, In this case, it's just matching to who the people they might be talking about. But the next stage for us as teachers might be to go, okay, what chunks of language can we see here that we could put to use to talk about any of these people, or we could put to use to talk about other jobs. So again, if you just have a quick look at these ideas, can you notice any chunks, any reusable chunks here? Okay. So what we might be seeing is, they're often criticized for ing, but they can also help ing, do something. So we could identify this as a chunk which the students could adapt to their different situations. Maybe, without them, we'd be. So what we're looking at is, yes, that includes the grammar, but we're just giving them this kind of frameworks for talking about other jobs. Okay. Final one here at this point is thinking about that, what language for analysing and challenging statistics. We see a lot of stuff in the news about research and kind of how things would be are going to be happening. We get lots of opinion polls, and a part of being critical is to understand the way that this research is constructed, and the way that the opinion polls are done. And what we give them is students is language contrary to popular opinion. Something is fundamentally flawed. We talk about the sample, whether it's random or self-selected. So in a way, this is quite sophisticated language. It is from an advanced outcomes, but this language is what you need in order to be able to challenge and think about research. And actually, over the whole course of the unit, the lesson is really about that. So we're teaching language, but we're also teaching the critical thinking skill of challenging and understanding research and how it's made, and why we might come to the wrong conclusion sometimes. Somebody mentioned there that it depended on the level whether we could do critical thinking. I think that is true to some degree, but I think one thing, again, it comes down to is what language we are teaching the students. So there's a kind of belief, in a way, we need to challenge our own taboos and our own ways of thinking about what elementary and beginner students are. There's a tendency for an elementary student or a beginner student to be seen in terms of the person, in terms of the level of language they have. So that we can only talk about, your favorite fruit or vegetables at beginner, but that person, when they're advanced, can be talking about research or politics or these other areas of what we might describe as being more critical. My feeling is that actually, when we think about the words themselves and the level of words, the frequency of words, what we can teach students is to, particularly if we're using, for example, translation in the class, we can teach students things like provide a useful service, improve education, help business, cause pollution, bad for the economy, etc. We can teach them this language. And interestingly, things like provide and service, if we look at them in terms of the frequency of language, how many times the students would see these in texts or hearing this language. That language is far, far more common than more traditional words that we might teach, like for food or rooms in the house. You know, provide is you would get about 300 hits per million words. The word banana, you'd get about 9. And the similar thing for words like lounge or living room. So what we can do is we can use very simple language. In this case, it's talking about town and city. We can show them these kind of basic words, better water, bigger library. These are genuine elementary words, although maybe improved might be something you don't often see at elementary. We can ask them what of these things they would like. The students can answer this very easily. And then we just basically, by providing the language, by telling them the meaning and giving them lots of examples, the students can then just give some opinions, but also explain their opinions to some degree about why they want a new airport or why they want a new hospital or why they need a bigger library. And the students, of course, will not be able to say this fluently or accurately, but it allows them to say something. And from that, you can respond and add in your ideas. So, for example, when I did this with a group of Italian teachers who were studying with us in the summer, we ended up talking about, they were from Sicily, the new bridge. There's not a bridge that goes from Sicily to the mainland. That's because basically there are interests. The businesses are worried about losing money, and the unions are worried about losing jobs. On the other side of on the mainland, there are environmental concerns. It might cause environmental damage and pollution, etc. All of these things came out. Now, what I'm telling you here is obviously not what the students said. They said things in a very simple way, such as lose jobs, create jobs. They said these very basic things. Sometimes not correct, but they are expressing it nonetheless. So if we see that, again, you can take that even for a lower level. This is from Outcomes Beginner. We give them, it's basically a kind of practice or re-practice, because the students have seen this already, of there is, there are. So they have a kind of revision from a previous unit. And then we're giving them, we basically give them the meanings. They just have to add in those forms, a lot, some, etc., in order for them to talk about their real situation. And then we can ask very simple questions. What do you think of education here? What do you think of schools here? What do you think of crime here, etc., using these basic words. And again, we can teach them a kind of phrase, it's better now, it's better in the past. The students don't really need to know everything about the grammar here. What we're focused on is enabling the communication, enabling the critical thinking, if you like. So we can get there if we think of different lexical choices. We think about enabling students to have opinions at the lowest levels, not just description, not just pointing at things. This is a hat, this is an orange. We can understand that also that we'll have to change to some degree what we think of pair work. The students won't be communicating a lot in pairs. They can do an initial, very simple exchange, but to kind of find out a little bit more, what we would do is as a teacher, perhaps we do a bit more upfront teaching. So we might, the students kind of exchange their pairs, we can ask them their opinion again, and then as teachers at this point, we might ask them why. The students will make an effort to say something, we can correct it, we can give them the language on the board to share with everybody. And there is a kind of bit more of a kind of teacher-student interaction, which perhaps is not what we've learned perhaps on the CELTA, where, you know, we're encouraging less TTT and more pair work. Okay, let's have a look at vested interests. Vested interest, self-interest, in a way, it's noticing what's not there and asking why and getting alternative perspectives. And I think photos are quite good for this. You may be able to find other examples on the internet. Any suggestions? What is not here? What is missing from this particular photo? Any thoughts? Pop it in the chat box if you like. What is missing here? There we go. Yes, Christopher has got it on the money there. Certainly, what he's looking at is missing. This is true, but what's missing is women. This is what we draw attention to in this particular photo, and so then that allows, you know, why are there no women there? Do you think? And that may lead us into some discussion about which we can help the students with by being prompted with questions. So do you think there are jobs that women aren't able to do? Are there kind of barriers for women to get to the top in particular jobs? Or men, for that matter. I mean, it doesn't have to be focused only on women in this regard. So we're getting the students to notice what's not there and think behind the photos. We could take that a bit further and think, well, what's not in your course book? Why not? Any thoughts about that? Any topics perhaps which are not in your course book? Why do you think that is? I mean, possibly a discussion of why women are not in certain jobs would be one of those things. Religion, politics. Yeah, so I mean, to some degree, we have to recognize that our course material itself is kind of restricting some discussions. And so we could ask students, it's either, I mean, we can either give them ourselves. So one thing I think we could look to do in terms of developing these areas is, you know, we can stick to our topics, we can stick to the course book to a large degree. This is from upper intermediate outcomes, and it's a thing on phones. And basically what we might do is taking jobs, words, food, etc. We can just add in extra questions ourselves. We can write them on the board. We can dictate them. They don't take a lot of preparation, where we just add these discussion points for the students to get a little bit deeper under the surface of what we're talking about in the book. But we could maybe ask the students to create their own questions. Okay, so we take the book, we show them the questions in the book. They look through the unit. We could ask what discussions about this topic are not there. Can you think of some questions? You get them to generate some of those ideas. So similarly, we could take this one. This is from, again, upper intermediate outcomes. We use these pictures. It's one of my favorite photos. I'm sorry, I've added the questions in rather than you can see them here. But again, what we can take is the photos from unusual angles and think about how, you know, why they are different to what we normally see. So in this case, this is the pyramids in Giza. So we could ask questions like, what's the normal view, what's not in the photo, or what's not in the photo. In this case, camels, desert, the pyramids themselves, if you like. Why don't we see this view very often? What's the photographer trying to say? Have you ever been surprised or disappointed by the place? What are the main tourist places? So as a kind of route for you as teachers to think of these questions, we can go from the talking about the photo and then broadening it out to some degree to ask about more about the wider and underlying topics there. Okay, what we have is looked at then is seeing how we can use the material which is there in terms of the language, highlighting language, and kind of trying to add something ourselves in terms of questions to draw out issues. Okay, now when we're approaching the idea of critical thinking, and particularly in vested interests, what we have to understand that there are vested interests at play in the teaching of critical thinking to some degree. And these things are complex, but also they're not always bad. They're not leading to bad things. We tend to think of vested interests as always leading to bad consequences. That's not necessarily the case. So as I speak to you now, in a way, I'm a representative of the publisher. I'm a representative, I'm a writer. I am a trainer and methodologist, so I think about training issues and methodology and how that impacts. I'm a teacher, and I'm also a language student. So at the moment, I've been learning Russian at beginner level. And all of these things work together and are sometimes in opposition. So the things that I might want to write as a writer or a methodologist sometimes come against what the publisher would like to us to write. And that often comes from other teachers' opinions of how language course books should be. So, you know, what the books that you see are sometimes what we could say is compromises of what's happening. Similarly, as teachers, we have to understand that there are particular prejudices and interests that we have, and that they have consequences as well, that they have impacts on what we do in the classroom. So, you know, some teachers quite reasonably want to prepare as little as possible, perhaps because they have a huge workload and they don't have time to do lots of preparation. Some teachers may want to be the boss. They want to avoid, or they want to keep control and avoid embarrassment. Maybe because their level of English isn't, you know, the highest it could be, or maybe it's just a personal thing. Lots of teachers are conscious that they need to deliver exam results, and sometimes their pay might be related to that. So this has consequences in terms of how we teach and how we use course books. So, you know, we'll often hear teachers talk about course books saying it teaches itself, or they will want an exercise which only has one answer or avoids kind of challenge. They want an easy material so that the students can get through it, and, you know, there's not difficult questions which come out of this. They want to avoid divergence from the textbook, possibly because language will, the students will produce language that they may not know. And then, of course, we have the issue about whether it can be tested, what's in the test, and, you know, they want answers to give the students. What I would say, though, is all of these kind of attitudes, to my mind, are counter to critical thinking. That we want to be giving space to students. We want to be responding to what they're trying to say. Divergence is a fundamental feature of critical thinking. What I would also add to that is that technology tends to have the same tendency of these attitudes. That when we do technology, when we're using stuff online, self-study stuff, it has to be teaching itself. It has to be one answer. We avoid divergence. And so actually, one thought here is that it may be in interests as teachers and as people who want to be employed in the future to encourage critical thinking, encourage divergence in the class, because that is where we can add value as teachers compared to artificial intelligence or computers. When we kind of try to break down then critical thinking, we saw a kind of list of possible areas. Now, this is an area I want to kind of just draw your attention to in understanding that from the publisher's point of view, they want to show you what they are doing in the course book and how their course book is different to other course books. And obviously, critical thinking is one of those things that we may be doing to differentiate from other course books. The first point is that, as we saw at the beginning, some activities which are throughout all course books are already teaching critical thinking, even if they're not labeled. So we need to be aware of that and kind of maybe drawing attention to it, or at least when we're choosing a book, to notice these questions and whether they are helping critical thinking. The publisher, though, will often highlight these things in a box. And what they'll give you is the title. These are from perspectives, and then the type of critical thinking that we are focused on. Now, what I want to suggest is we have to have a little kind of skepticism about this, because while the box is useful in that it allows us to speak directly to the teacher and students, we can show what is being taught, and if the student is struggling, then maybe, making them aware of why we've got this activity is important. I also want to kind of just highlight that there are issues with this, that in a way what we are doing sometimes with the critical thinking box is there's a potential to turn it into a kind of another type of grammar. And this could apply to any kind of skills training. That what we're emphasizing then is we're learning about rather than doing it. That we've got one in every unit, and each one needs to be different and separated, and they're not interacting with other skills. And so you don't get this kind of repetition and practice of the skill. And from a teacher's point of view, for some teachers, I'm sure not those watching today, but sometimes there's this attitude, just the same with grammar, that we've done the box section, we've done the grammar section, that's it, I've done the teaching and the students have done the learning. Now, the box itself doesn't prevent, it doesn't cause all of these attitudes, but they can be a result of them. So if we look at these ideas, we can see how they kind of, this is from upper intermediate perspectives, you can see how you get these separated skills. Although to be fair, you will see some, for example, slight repetition. So understanding, evaluating ideas and assessing information is quite similar. There are crossovers, maybe about with interpreting ideas and evaluating. So we're getting some repetition, which I think is a good thing through the actual activities the students are doing, which are labeled critical thinking. What's more important, though, is that we are drawing attention to and practicing the same thing over time in different contexts. So in a way, as teachers, we have to remember that the box is kind of like the smallest part, and this is true of grammar as well as skills. The explanation is the smallest part, and the way the students will master these skills in this language will be over time, which actually is another reason why we need to be noticing what students are saying and responding to what they're saying and giving them the language to help them say what they want to say. So what we can see here is thinking about how we respond to students and giving them ideas. The boxes, we give an explanation, but the important thing is not just about explaining what to do, we're giving them opportunities to practice it. So in this case, and what I'd like to say is you can apply these to any text. Most of these ones apply to text. They come after the text in the book. And I think that's a good area to address these issues. And what we here the question, this is about, the text is about hitchhiking in this case, and there's a decline in hitchhiking, and the text gives various reasons for this. So any text where we're giving reasons for a particular phenomenon, we could ask the students to put in order what they think the most important reason is. We can ask the students to challenge the text. Do you agree? How important are the other reasons? We can, if there is an analogy, this is the author gives a comparison with another situation. We as teachers could challenge the students to think about that comparison. Is it a good comparison? And those kind of frameworks for questions you can apply to other texts, whether you're using this course book or another. Similarly, we've got, this one is about supporting arguments. So this one is about the Olympics. It comes after a text about the Olympics, whether it's valuable to a society or not. And again, you can do this for other texts in your course book. You could find extra information on the internet, extra facts about it. Some of those facts could be supportive or countering the arguments in the text, so that we're encouraging the students to think beyond the textbook as the answer to everything. And again, that's not demanded of any one particular course book. It's something you can bring to any course book. And then finally, then we have a little debate, which just to again point out is that we are doing critical thinking in lots of ways, and we have been for a long time. It's not entirely a new thing. So I've just got 15 minutes left. We're going to come to questions. I'm just going to very quickly, 5 minutes, just run through very quickly a unit from perspectives, and to show you how the critical thinking is working within this unit. And it's basically, we've got language for critical thinking, which we've talked about before. We're looking at critical thinking about language, which we haven't mentioned yet, but we're going to. Look at the task to generate language. So it's thinking about the critical thinking task, but then the response to them. And then these were kind of repeated encounters. So this is a unit on creativity. Vested interest alerts. It is from Perspectives. It's a book I've written. Other alternatives are available. So what you see here is basically we're teaching language in many usual way. The language comes from, in a way, partly from the video, the TED video that they watched later, where they're talking about creativity and rules. So immediately the language we're giving, students maybe don't always think of creativity having rules, or they often think of creativity as opposition to rules. And one of the areas we're looking at through the unit is challenging the idea of creativity itself, as well as teaching them processes. Perhaps process is the better word, rather than rules, to be creative. What I would then follow up this, and this is where the teacher's adding value, is being critical, thinking of questions about the language which will generate other language. So what else do people follow? What might happen if you don't obey a rule? What's an example of a high score on a test? Who sets the rules? What else can people set? So these are kind of, they're in a sense, they're concept checking questions, but what I would call them as divergent concept questions. So actually exploring how these words are used in real life. There are then questions at various points in the unit where we discuss what you think it means to be creative. They're just discussion questions, but obviously with a critical and challenging point of view, getting them to think around the subject. We give them a text where they are talking about testing tests of creativity and challenging whether these tests are good or not, or leaving that space for them to discuss that. And also showing them the idea that creativity is a two-way process where we brainstorming ideas and producing lots of different ideas, which is typically seen as the creative bit. But it's also then actually narrowing down these ideas to what are practical, which are not always seen as creative, but in a creative industries are very much part of that process. There is a critical thinking box which follows this text, but interestingly, we don't look at it in terms of creativity. We're trying to integrate different skills as we're going along. So the students are seeing it in different ways. In this case, they are given other information about the facts or opinions about this task, so distinguishing between those, and then also asking them to decide if that changes their opinions of the text. So it's also evaluating ideas. So that that box which we saw earlier is also part of this practice. We're not just doing one skill, in fact. There's a little TED talk where we ask them to then also, challenge their ideas. Do they have any different ideas? So not kind of just sticking to what they've thought at the beginning. There's a text then about a TED talk, which is about creating new words. This is where the students will also see a kind of rules around creativity, if you like. But again, we're asking them to then challenge what's in the text, thinking about from different perspectives. If you're a poet or a politician, scientist, or teenager, what are the reasons that we create new words? Are they all good reasons? And again, that's what we saw right at the beginning of this session. And again, we can give them the language to support that. And then there's a speaking task at the end, where actually what they do is put into practice the creativity model that they learnt about in the reading earlier in the unit. So they're not just learning about, they are also doing. So as a kind of conclusion, should we teach critical thinking skills at all in an English class? I think what you'll be understanding is, yes, I agree that it should be, but mainly because I think it coincides with good language learning. So it's, when we think about critical thinking, it's going to be language and communication rich. The students will be generating more things than if they're doing a narrow grammar, vocabulary syllabus. It's student focused. So the important thing is that when the students are producing their ideas through these tasks, that we as teachers have to understand that, yes, we may have a role in shaping what they're trying to say, but the first point of shaping is just giving them the language they're trying to say. And then afterwards, perhaps questioning their opinions, making them see if they can maybe change their opinions or say more sophisticated things about what they've said. And that's the thing, there are divergent possibilities and developments within critical thinking. But obviously note that is an opinion and not a fact. So should you use a course book to do it? Again, I would say that's entirely up to you. There are ways of doing all of these tasks, I hope you will see, without a course book, but lots of ways that we can adapt and use course books to develop these ideas. That's it. We have 10 minutes left for questions. Thank you very much. If you are interested in what we've done here, you can contact me as well on andrew@lexicallab.com. We also at Lexical Lab run self-study courses in the summer school. You can find out about them here. And we have, you know, some of the ideas in terms of responding to students and the questions that we ask about language, the critical thinking questions about language, you can find in our book, Teaching Lexical. So thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and do ask some questions if you would like.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrew.
Any tips in teaching language chunks to learners? Well, I mean, I'm afraid I'm going to plug my book again, Vested Interest Alert. There are ideas within teaching lexically, but I think basically our idea is to start with the course book that you're using. And ideally, if the course book has either in the grammar sections or the readings or the vocabulary sections, is trying to notice patterns within these so that when you're going through the answers or when you're going through the material, you can draw out these chunks to students. And then, you know, when you become familiar with the kind of idea, it may be that the students will try and say something, you correct it, and in your correction, you will notice that there is a chunk, and you can show the students on the board, perhaps, the way these chunks can be manipulated. But it does take a little bit of work. You need to be thinking about, you know, have that mindset for looking for these chunks. Yeah, Alex, I appreciate your ideas. So, you know, if you wanted to see 5 or 10 minutes of a lesson where this applied, I mean, it's not the session I prepared, so, but I'll take that on board for the next one and see if we can fit something in some way. I mean, I guess the main point I would say in terms of using the material is all that I am doing in terms of adding value is that I basically follow what's, I mean, okay, I've written my own course book, so you will understand that I like what's in there. But basically, with most course books, including ones which I've used which are not mine, I essentially just follow what's in the book. But what I'm looking to do is to try to listen to what students, I sometimes add those kind of extra questions written on the board. And what's important for me is noticing what the students are trying to say. And beforehand, also trying to think myself about what they would want to say. So through that, I kind of give them the language on the board. And it's just tends to be a process of doing their speaking, giving feedback, exploring the language that they're trying to say, sometimes repeating the exercise in a different pair so that they can make use of that language. And this would be, you know, really the main focus of what I do in the classroom. Yeah. Alex, no offense taken, no offense taken. Alex was saying it sounded a bit rude, but not at all. I think it's fine. Yeah, and I think it's good to want to be seeing these things in context.
Well, we have some very good questions over in the Q&A box as well, Andrew.
Right, okay.
One from Amy Gowers, the very first one. She says, doesn't the classroom environment also affect the amount of critical thinking happening? For example, learner-led and classroom which encourage autonomy will naturally have more opportunities for and examples of critical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly true. Where I suppose, you know, maybe I'm thinking as much in giving space. I know that, for example, for a lot of teachers, they're very connected with their course book. They may have obligations from the institution as well. And what I'm looking to do is to try and bridge this gap between only doing the course book and as something more autonomous. So where I'm trying to think is to find these spaces within the course book material, particularly around speaking, and I consider any speaking to be these opportunities, whether it's a warmer, pre-reading, etc., to then explore what the students are saying at that point. And quite often in my own classes, we go off on a tangent then to discuss those issues a little bit more. And that's where the kind of learner autonomy comes in. But yes, I would absolutely agree.
There is one more, Andrew, slightly down from Centre Lick. Andrew, if you were to list up your top 5 favorite creative thinking questions to ask about a picture, what would they be? Depends on the picture, of course, but...
Yeah, it does. I mean, as I mentioned, it's not really, I suppose it's more of a process in terms of how I write these questions. So what I would tend to do is to start with a picture. You can start with something simple, like, you know, what's in the picture. So thinking about describing it. And then we're trying to move away and thinking about, well, what's not in the picture, obviously, which you might expect elsewhere. Or why has the photographer taken this perspective? What other perspectives might they have? And that might get into some information. But then I would tend towards moving it to personalizing, you know, have you ever been in this situation? And then maybe then also talking about connecting it to some kind of other issue, which perhaps isn't normally talked about in the material. So this is where you might get into some of those taboo areas. The important things I want to add about the taboo is that what you're doing then, if you have a list of these types of questions, the taboo question, if you like, is only one question amongst 6 or 7 questions. We're not making the whole lesson about the taboo. And that's where I think we get into difficulties, that we force students sometimes into situations where they don't want to talk about it. Whereas if you have it just as one aspect of several questions where they can also talk about themselves, there's an opportunity, A, for them not to say anything. They can just say, I've nothing to say, but the lesson doesn't fail as a result. But what you will find is actually most students do engage with it, and then the kind of conversation develops of its own accord, which brings us back to that answer to the first question we had there.
Yeah. And you get amazing emergent language coming as a result as well, which is
exactly, yeah. So we're working with that language which comes up as a result of it. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here. It is a shame that we couldn't have you in person like it was going to be arranged back in March.
Yeah.
We had everything planned, even our meal ordered and everything, but unfortunately,
I know.
It's one of those things.
Next time,
exactly, next time. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.